I'm so sorry to have kept you all waiting, but my creative mornings began with a 30-minute wait for the cab. Anyway, look, I'll be very, very quick, and I thought I'd just say a little bit about the nature of creativity as I see it. You know, I think one of the most interesting questions in the whole world is, where do ideas come from? It's a simple question, but it's got a very, very complicated answer. I mean, I love what Albert Einstein once said, that if I actually knew what I was doing, I wouldn't call it research. That's a fabulous testament to the sort of the anarchy of the developing ideas. So look, creativity is, what is it? It's the defeat of habit by ambition. It's maintaining an unreasonable commitment to change. It's about putting a high value on being cussed. Creativity is about a tolerance, even affection, for failure or the possibility of it. Creativity is a characteristic of success in all its forms. It involves a passion for change, resistance to the ordinary, an absolute refusal of the commonplace. Creativity involves a preference for challenges, an interest in paradox, a dislike of boredom, and the ability to write lists like this in the back of a cab. Our economy was once based on what Marx and later the economist Joseph Schumpeter called creative destruction. That's what the Industrial Revolution was. It was destroying the old way of doing things and making new ways. And this is something fundamental, I think, to life and culture itself. The nature of creative. I mean, all civilization, culture of the very word. Culture implies growth, which implies change, implies creativity. I mean, even back in the Bhagavad Gita, the great Indian epic, Shiva is, of course, both the destroyer and the creator of worlds. But what worries me so much about our contemporary circumstances is that we've moved from this fine old idea of creative destruction, let's get rid of the old and make something new, and instead our economy anyway is based on what's been called destructive creation, by which I mean the focusing on abstract financial products with absolutely no cultural or social value. And as it turns out, as we all know, for the past 5 years, they didn't have very much financial value either. We've lost the ability to make things. We've lost this belief in actually making things, and this fundamental belief that the economy depends on selling goods and products and possibly even services which other people want. I've only got one quote in the Oxford Dictionary of Contemporary Quotations, and it's this. It's my absolute favourite one, and I'm always haggling with economists about it. It's this. Civilizations, wherever they are remembered by the monuments, the artefacts that they leave behind, not by their public sector borrowing requirement. I mean it. It's a fundamental belief. And I think without making things, we live in a meaningless culture. I mean, a couple of years ago, there was that wonderful Radio 4 programme, which was captivated the nation, series by Neil MacGregor from the British Museum, A History of the World in 100 Objects. I mean, it's quite impossible to imagine somebody doing, a history of the world in 100, credit default swaps. It's never, ever going to happen. I'm constantly antagonised by and antagonising accountants and economists, because I'm totally against the idea that price alone, cost and price alone, dominate human incentive. I really don't believe that. I mean, and happily, it's becoming under attack. This is because it's actually wrong. People actually disagree. Actually disagree with the idea that price and cost alone. History disagrees. No one, of course, knows what it cost to build Stonehenge or the Great Eastern, and of course, no one cares. And related to this belief, and I'm not advocating anarchy. Clearly, you've got to have, running any organisation, you have to have some sort of financial controls. But as Machiavelli said in his famous guide to management consultancy, The Prince, it's always got si guarda al fine. Always have the end result in mind, and that's the important thing. Anyway, you've got to consider as well the always paradoxical nature of creativity, which it was on my list. Take, for instance, Alec Issigonis's famous Mini, undoubtedly the most influential and ingenious car of all time. Yet British Motor Corporation, who made it, they were making it, manufacturing it for 17 years before they actually realised they weren't making it at a profit. So primitive with their cost controls. But now, who now regrets their decision? To do so. Another example from the motor industry, André Citroën. Whose old company, no longer the case today, but historically, Citroën can probably claim to have produced more fine, interesting and ingenious cars than any other manufacturer. Citroën actually said, from the moment an idea is worth having, no one cares what it costs. I mean, never mind, actually, because of Citroën not caring what it cost, the company actually went bust and had to be bought by Michelin. Still, we're all immensely grateful that Citroën, was moved in that way. And I love that thing Billy Wilder, the film producer, once said. And it was this, he said, there's something you never, ever, ever hear. And it's somebody saying this. You never hear this, he said. Go see this movie. I hear it came in under budget. The whole point is that desire, in any form, desire is not numerical. I mean, consumer desire, human, erotic desire, it's not numerical. It can't actually be quantified. I mean, I loved it also that Maurice Sartre once said that creativity is the last legal way to get an unfair advantage. But how to, anyway, if you're running a sort of businesses we're all interested in, how do you actually encourage creativity? How do you sort of generate ideas? I don't know. I had this whimsical thought the other day. There's been a lot of fuss recently that art and design are not included in the English baccalaureate. That seems to me to be fine in a way, because of the paradoxical nature of creativity. I've got this argument which I had to present to a politician. If any politician would listen to me, I think you should make, if you made creativity illegal, if you made it subject to terrible deterrent penalties, that would be an extraordinarily interesting stimulus. To truly. There's a creative truth here. I think creative people tend to be pirates, thieves, psychopaths, or at least not people responsive to psychological norms. I love it that Picasso once said, I don't borrow, I steal. That's cussedness for you. I also love it that Picasso absolutely. Is there any more persuasive exemplar of the creative personality than Picasso? I mean, the very great majority of his art was actually really mediocre and poor. But then there's this extraordinary body of work which is absolutely sublime, epochal, and life-changing. But the great thing about Picasso was he churned out the dross and then went on to masterpiece, and it was continuous change. I always think one of the tests for great art is the ability to change. It's one of the reasons. It's just diversion, but I may as well mention it while I'm here. That's why I think Henry Moore is not a world-class artist. I mean, I'm very glad he did what he does, but there's no development in Henry Moore. Picasso changes year by year by year. Sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's wrong-headed, but it's always change. I love it as well that Picasso once said, if you can imagine something, it's real. There are lots of interesting examples from industry about the primacy of creativity. When Sony was at its absolute peak, its boss, Akio Morita, defined Sony, when Sony, for 30 years between the late 50s and late 80s, early 90s, they actually had an amazing technical innovation every year. And when I had the opportunity to ask him about this, I didn't organise an exhibition about Sony in the V&A years ago. I asked Mr. Morita, I said, how do you define what Sony does? He said, it's simple. We do what the others don't do. However, it has to be said, Sony's period of creativity ended when it began to do exactly the same as everybody else did, and we all know what's happening to Sony now. It's simply going bust. Change is the absolute necessity. You can't always. Change is the defining thing. Change, Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher, believed that change, another nice paradox here, change is the only constant in the world. It happens everywhere. I mean, we are all changing continuously. You're not physiologically exactly the same person as you were this time last month, because your epidermis keeps on changing. I mean, everything. We are, things which don't change are dead. Change is unavoidable. It's the same way as your epidermis is replaced every month. I think it's got to be the same with any organisation. one of the best novels, if you haven't read it, I really do suggest it, is the great book *The Leopard* by di Lampedusa. It's about Sicily, and it was a great movie with Burt Lancaster incongruously playing the Sicilian prince. Anyway, the Sicilian prince is standing looking at the crumbling palazzo in Palermo or wherever it is, and he looks around. He says, "Well, if you want things to stay the same, they must change." And that's a fine proposition for dismal reactionaries of any type to ponder. But anyway, so very few things, the nature of creativity, that very few things are absolutely certain about it. But I think an absolute fixed point is this: it's a commitment to disruption. Plus that, as I said before, an appetite for surprise, courage, energy, and enthusiasm, and an absolutely, case-hardened resistance to criticism and an insistence on wanting to do it beautifully. Now, the interesting thing, as many of you know, of course, this portfolio of human attributes makes managing creative people extremely difficult. And equally, predicting creativity is equally troublesome. One of the best examples I know of somebody scientifically trying to predict creativity was a fascinating man called Nikolai Kondratiev, who was Lenin's first commissar of business efficiency. And he had this idea in the very early years of the Soviet Union that all economic and cultural all activity, human activity, warfare, art, is on a 50-year cycle. It's called Kondratiev's waves, and it goes, certain patterns emerge. It's an utterly persuasive theory, but he called this the super cycle. It's worth finding out a bit about Kondratiev's super cycle, because I actually think it actually works. However, poor old Kondratiev, being the creative type, kept on insisting about the importance of the supercycle, of the 50-year sinusoidal thing. And of course, this ran absolutely contrary to the orthodoxy of Marxist-Leninism, so he was sent to the Gulag to ponder his concept at leisure and in greater depth. As I said before, I'm extremely wary about accountants. I mean, accountants are no help in anything. In fact, if you look at the accountancy profession's code of practice, which I once had reason to do, you'll see that you will actually see that to be an accountant is to be recruited as an enemy of innovation and excitement. I mean, not for nothing has the word creative accounting become a slur, and an insult. I mean, no wonder. No wonder businesses run by accountants sooner or later atrophy. So seriously, the professional terms of reference for accountants actually resist innovation and novelty. Of course, it's a backward-looking profession by definition, because you're constantly looking at what's happened rather than thinking about what should happen next. But of course, consumers are no more help in trying to find, new ideas. I mean, of course, famously, Henry Ford had that wonderful thing. He said it wasn't called market research in his day, but he said he never bothered to ask consumers what they wanted, because if he'd asked consumers in 1908 what they'd wanted, they would have said, "Thank you, Mr. Ford, we'd like you to invent, the gasoline buggy and the automobile." But instead, Henry Ford said if I'd asked them, they would just say, "Well, give me a faster horse." So the consumers don't have any answers. More certainly, if you're trying to understand where ideas come from, you can actually look to technology. I think new technologies, rather like Kondratiev and his sinusoidal supercycle, I think new technology very often does stimulate ideas. For instance, it was only the great adventure of American car styling, which began in the 1930s, only became possible when US Steel started making sheet metal in wider and wider strips. Before about 1930 something or other, sheet steel was only available in rolls about that wide, and so that obviously limited the sculptural forms you could make automobiles out of. When they started making very, very wide things, you could start pressing complicated shapes. And then there's the thing about the transistor. The people who actually invented the transistor, who are sort of three buzz-cutted, white-coated American technologists working for Bell Telephone Labs, said there were absolutely in the late 1940s they patented it, and they said that, well, it's all very well, but there are no commercial applications for the transistor. It was just pure science. And then, of course, Mr. Morita of Sony came along and found indeed there were commercial applications for the for the transistor. But a great American car, the Chevrolet Bel Air, or the first transistor radio, the Sony TR-55, they were great successes because they were the products of vision and commitment, not the products of marketing proposals. But the most important attribute of creativity is, I think, not so much a mere tolerance of mistakes and taking risks as a positive appetite for them. Making mistakes, our friend Henry Ford once said, making mistakes is just a very good opportunity to start again more intelligently. And success also, according to Ms. Soichiro Honda, who founded the motorbike and car company, he said success, rather like Picasso, he said success is just that very, very small part of human activity which is not actually in a total cock-up. The thing is, creative types cope with cock-ups and blunder on, supported like Picasso by the magnificent good bits which turn up now and again. Uncreative types tend to find error and mistake unsurpassable obstacles. And meanwhile, of course, politicians never, ever, ever want to make a mistake or to get anything wrong, which is one reason why true creativity will never, ever happen in government. But sometimes Shiva avenges himself on the innovators. Just like Kondratiev's supercycle 50-year thing, I've got this absolute conviction that the creative life of big companies is limited. Sony, as I said, is going down the tubes in the same way Polaroid, Xerox, Kodak, and BlackBerry going down the tubes. Actually, it's going to be Apple next. You've seen that after an incredible period of innovative activity, Apple is now just, the news is always bad with Apple now. It's losing market share, the share prices are down, it's lost it, and ever since Steve Jobs died, it's sort of lost its sense of motivation and vision. But anyway, true creators are always one step ahead of even the gods and even the accountants. Miles Davis once said, and here's a definition of creativity for you, I don't play what's there, I play what's not there. And someone asked him, what are you going to play today? He said, I'll play it first and I'll tell you what it is afterwards. So that's your definition of creativity, I think. It's what is not, or at least not yet. But no one's actually, and I'm coming to my end, I promise, no one's ever found a reliable method of generating ideas, but people keep on trying. I think what's easier to say about generating ideas, we know what, not like Miles Davis, we know what not to do. I think we've got to avoid groupthink. Groupthink is that horrible sort of intellectual collectivism, which it's been made worse by all our dumb electronic networks. This belief that the collectivism can be creative. This ecstasy of connectivity, I believe, is not actually being encouraged. Some people, because of groupthink, people are saying that we can, the autonomous creative acts are things of the past. We can all get together and crowdsource something. Actually, we've had the internet now for 20 years, and the internet crowdsourcing hasn't even produced, a haiku, a 14-syllable poem yet, let alone anything more, anything more interesting. People argue for this amazing creative democracy where the responsibility of developing ideas is devolved to the consumer. Well, I don't know about that. Would you like your dinner made by somebody from the queue in the Tesco checkout, or would you like your dinner made by Nigella Lawson? I know what I'd prefer. I think one of the great deceptions, ruinous fallacies and lazy excuses in contemporary life, and especially in contemporary business life, is the idea that teams get things done. The focus group is one of the most horrid examples of that. I had a terrible I was briefly creative director of the Millennium Project until I had so many fallings out with the government minister, Peter Mandelson, involved, because of him and his bloody focus groups, that I ended up storming out. I know I've got to stop in a second, but I must tell you, this is not in my script, but I must say, if you want to know, since you're all in this sort of business, here's the worst example of what a focus group activity, which was actually the cause of my resigning the whole Millennium job. I'd commissioned the graphics for the Millennium from he's alas now dead, but in my mind unquestionably the world's greatest graphic designer, who did a fantastic job, brilliantly well conceived and executed, graphics for every application. It worked, it passed all the tests of great graphics. And we were going to have it painted on top of, painted on the runways at Heathrow so people could see it, it was going to be everywhere. I presented it to the board of the Millennium Company, and the whole board just, applauded, and the chairman said, "That's brilliant, Stephen, get it done now." We paid a six-figure, 15 years ago, we paid a six-figure sum to this designer who was thrilled with it. I called him and said, "The board's accepted it, we're going to do it, it's going to be the best graphic campaign ever." Peter Mandelson took the graphic boards seriously to a focus group in Northern Ireland, and I'm serious. I'm not making this up. And he showed the graphics, the Millennium, to the focus group in Northern Ireland, who said that Alan Fletcher, the pentagram guy, who's the graphic designer involved, who'd done this, the focus group said, "Oh, it looks like a map of the British Isles without Ireland on it." It didn't at all. But then he said that Peter Mandelson then came back and just turned his focus group. Anyway, we had to turn back the tide. I had to tell Alan Fletcher we weren't going to do. Anyway, it was just appalling. That was my focus. I won't have anything to do with focus groups of housewives who've been paid £25 their tube fare and given some yogurt tokens in order to make important decisions about things. Then, just while we're going on by my revulsion about collective activity, there's the terrible idea of brainstorming. This is an invention, of course. Brainstorming is actually coined from the Mad Men era of Madison Avenue. Paradoxically, the idea of the brainstorm was an autonomous creative act by a guy called Alex Osborne, who was the O in the BBDO ad agency, and he did this in his book called Applied Imagination. Osborne claimed the brainstorming concept is that groups of people, a mix of experts and novices, may, if locked in a room, possibly together for a very long time, generate new ideas. Now, anybody who's been to a brainstorming session knows that this is never, ever, ever the case. I mean, the collective process doesn't stimulate ideas. I think it actually obscures them. Group dynamics and the subtle pressures and a reluctance to be truly outspoken, which are essential human characteristics, combine to mean that brainstorming produces at best a light, irritating drizzle of complacent mediocrity. So far from being liberating and democratic, brainstorming sessions, I think, are just evidence of the strange tendency towards Soviet-style collectivism, which we have in thought management, which we have in contemporary business life. It's exactly the same, I promise you, it's exactly the same with PowerPoint. PowerPoint is not, of course, an efficient and invigorating presentation tool, nor is it a good medium for presenting ideas. In fact, quite the opposite. PowerPoint, I believe, encourages dull, linear thinking and disguises, platitudinous structures by neat graphics. Brainstorms and PowerPoint are the democracy of a parliament of fools. So, instead of this sort of production line thinking, consider instead, the examples of the great artists, some of the people I've already mentioned. You've got to think about Schubert in his garret, Picasso harassing a canvas or a pot in his studio in the south of France, Isaac Newton in his study in Cambridge. And how did I mentioned Einstein on research before? How did Einstein get his ideas? Where did relativity come from, Dr. Einstein? Somebody once asked. He said, it was simple. I just ignored an axiom. Ignoring axioms, that's something I'd recommend. Intellectually speaking, Einstein was a believer in do-it-yourself. And I think it's being alone is possibly the best stimulus, I think, to creativity, the best way to generate ideas. Great thoughts tend to come. There's countless historical examples of this. The great psychiatrist Anthony Storr wrote about this at length. Great ideas tend to come to solitary people, not to weary groups in unlit, overheated hotel rooms near Heathrow. The great poet of solitude, again, another book I'd strongly recommend if you haven't already read it, is Henry David Thoreau's book Walden, published in 1854. He was a sort of disciple of Ruskin, but he went to live in the woods alone. He wrote, for instance, I had 3 chairs in my house, 1 for solitude, 2 for friendship, 3 for society. He would have needed, of course, 12 chairs in his house if he wanted to go brainstorming. Yet, in solitary exhilaration, and entirely by himself, Thoreau wrote one of the great inspirational books of all time. I said his book called Walden. I would recommend anybody who's worried about where ideas come from, anybody who's flirting with doing a bit of brainstorming or preparing a PowerPoint presentation, or even thinking of joining a focus group, to get a copy of Walden and to go and sit alone with it in a room. Thank you. And I'm sorry I was late. Why did I stop tweeting? Well, I didn't really start. I mean, I don't like...
There were two.
Well, no, I had a book, the publisher of the book I published, tweeting, I had a big book out when tweeting had just started. And don't misunderstand, I'm not a technophobe. I mean, I'm completely wired and always using this stuff. But, anyway, my publisher said, you've got to start tweeting because it's the way you build up the audience. No, you know. And I did it twice, and I just found the results so desultory and so depressing that I just refused. So thanks to Drew's amazing investigative work, you'll see that I said I tweeted twice in 2009 and simply haven't tweeted since. But that makes it, I have another life where I do a little bit of consultancy for companies, and I think the clever thing to do is really not to be available, not universally available everywhere, particularly on sort of social networks and particularly on internet-related media. So it's cool. It's like the very, very smartest restaurants in the world don't have a phone, and don't take reservations. And goodness me, that lifts their. I mean, nowadays, the great paradox of contemporary life is nowadays any fool, can get in touch with 50 million people within 5 minutes. We could all send important messages now. But the value of that message would, I believe, probably be rather low. Much better, if you really want to impress someone, much better to write them a letter with a nice fountain pen on decent paper. I'm really serious. And I'm not saying that in a technophobic sense. I'm passionate about new technology and change, but you get paradoxically, the more pixelated and networked we get, the less value it has.
Okay. You talked about the kind of intensity of creativity. I think Edison, to paraphrase, once talked about 1% in inspiration, 99% perspiration. Do you think the same applies in creativity?
Absolutely, yes.
And where is the creativity? I mean, we're a bit, in the creative industry, a bit, in love with ourselves in a way, and often don't recognise the creativity in other industries. And you've talked about lots of people who aren't in the creative industry, as Henry Ford and Einstein and so on. And how should our creativity relate to their creativity? Well,
it's all the same. I mean, for me, it's all the same thing. I mean, I don't actually see, the media sort of style creativity as different to technological or something. I mean, I just think there are just creative people who do, and as I said, the creative people, my observations is that those creative people have those characteristics I described. But the biggest one of all is the desire for change and the tolerance of failure. They're the two defining characteristics, and both in science and and technology and in art. That's why, as I said, why Picasso is the absolute paradigm. Just kept on changing every year, every month. He was doing more and changing and as the anarchist Bakunin said, even the act of destruction is a creative act. I mean, Picasso could have stopped his career in 1903 and would still would have been, one of the greatest artists of all time. But he kept on going, and that's So I don't see this creative world as different to the great scientists as well. They were, the man who invented communications theory and the binary system, somebody called Claude Shannon. He's one of the most interesting men who's ever lived. He's also an expert juggler and unicyclist. No, seriously, he actually, and in order to create the whole of it, Claude Shannon invented this thing, well, not invented, made the distinction between signal and noise, on which all of sort of our entire concepts about computing depend on the difference between signal and noise, and you can digitize. Once you decide that signal and noise are not the same thing, you can digitize it, and that's the binary thing. And Shannon just said, he was asked how he did it. He said, "Well, I just invented the maths that made it possible." That's so. He was a man in a laboratory surrounded by spitting valves and fizzing test tubes or something, but the spirit which moved him was exactly the same as the spirit which moved Picasso. I mean, not accepting what had gone before and being prepared to change and destroy. What was So it's so for me, it's all the same thing.
Should we be working harder and reading more? And
Yes. There's another thing about where
Reading
ideas.
less?
I mean, absolutely, yes. That's why you need to spend more time alone in rooms and less time brainstorming. In my observation, there is, the best designers certainly are the ones who are exposed to the most ideas and the most images. No question of that. You can't get too much stimulus. But so the paradox is I think you can get a great deal of stimulus by being solitary. Anyway.
Anybody else? Yes.
Can you train creativity?
No, but I think well, what do you mean? Once you've got a creative person, can you train him or her? Is that what you mean, or can you? I don't think you can teach creativity, if that's what you mean. You can't teach creativity, but you can, based on what I was saying, what I've learned, you can help create circumstances in which it might flourish.
How much do you sleep?
Sleep? Well, not why? I've always, since you ask, I've actually always been a very bad sleeper. But yes, I think it's probably it's a very interesting question. I think it's and it's one I've never been asked. I've been asked many things, but never I think that, at least not in public. I think I'm sure it's why I need more time to think about it, but I think it's probably a very good idea to sleep. I'm just glad I kept you awake for a moment.
Anybody else? Yes, Owen.
Hi. It's kind of interesting your views on things such as focus groups and also the way that creativity and design is written. Occasionally it's kind of accused of being verbose or elitist. Do you think that design and creativity should be that? Do you think it should be elitist, or do you think it's something that should be opened up?
Well, no, I don't think. Cole Porter once said, "I'm not a snob. I just like the best." That's what it is. I mean, you can't be interested in design, as you know, which is essentially my subject. I mean, the design is by definition democratic, the ultimate democratic activity, because the design is meant to be the thing which is, reaches the largest number of, provides high quality experiences or goods to the largest number of people. So I think it's, yes, it must be democratic in that way, but that doesn't mean to say you mustn't have very, very high standards. It's not really quite an answer, to your question, but then, when in doubt, confuse the issue. That's one of the best bits. Oh, there's another bit of fabulous advice, which was given to. You'll find it in this book, by the way. It was given to the. It was advice given by the Foreign Office to British diplomats. It's quite formal. It's all in a proper formal, government sort of publication. And it's this: never tell a lie, but never tell the whole truth, and never miss an opportunity of going to the lavatory. I mean, that's how our diplomats are trained. Isn't that wonderful? But I love the idea about never telling a lie, but never telling the whole truth. That's very clever.
Stephen, thank you so much. Put your hand together.